Welcome to The Real Build. I'm your host, Jamila, and every Tuesday we are peeling back the curtains of the construction industry and diving into the business, the job, the struggles, the trade secrets, the political side of it. It all wraps up together. I have an amazing guest with me here today, Renee Merrifield. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so lucky. I have been a huge fan. I actually started my construction career within your company, working for a sub-trade or company of your company.
Absolutely.
Selling an amazing community you guys put together, West Harbor. Yes.
It's one of the gems. I love it. I love it.
And a grind of many ups and downs.
Labor of love. That's what I prefer to say. Labor of love.
Okay.
But honestly, when I drive around that subdivision and that community, I am so proud of what we were able to accomplish. It's absolutely everything that we could have imagined it to be.
And like, you went over to the other side of the bridge when no one wanted. Was it even the old bridge? Have you gone through a bridge?
It actually opened before we started construction.
Okay. But, yes. Venturing over there on a piece of leased land, still a lot of mindset around that, and had this vision for, a lakefront, boat in, boat out community. Everyone gets their own boat, pool amenities, I'm a huge fan. I mean, obviously, I went in there and sold it. So,
and you're selling it again. But honestly, when it first started, it was supposed to be 1,500 units, and our master plan community was for a lot more density. We were to have the first towers that would ever be on the west side of the bridge.
Wow!
But ultimately, we suffered through the recession of 2008, 2009, and when that happened, I put a piece of painter's tape across the boardroom threshold, and I said, "All right, everyone, called this meeting with all of our consulting team and our internal team," and they were like, "What's with the tape?" And I said, "That's your ego. And we're about to step over your ego because we have to reimagine this community as something different than what we've all spent the last 4 years making it to be." And so in doing that, we wanted to preserve that ethos, the ethos that you just described, mm-hmm. right? How do you live that Okanagan lifestyle, that Okanagan dream, what everyone comes here for, the beach, the pools, the green space, the connection to nature, as well as, having that boat space. And in the end, that's what we did.
Yeah,
we
did.
We captured the ethos, but changed the product mix mm-hmm. into that single family, multifamily mixture. And in doing so, I think really created a whole community that, our ad campaign, We Love Living Here, was all done with residents of West Harbor. And they were so proud to participate, which made me pretty happy.
That's lovely. And, I think one of my things that I'm just so admirable of you, and I think is your extreme superpower, and you demonstrated it so beautifully there when you said you took the piece of green tape and you put it on the floor. You are so masterful at, envisioning all of the feelings in the room. All of the aspects of what's going on, and bringing it all together in a metaphor, a visual metaphor that you can get people to rally with you and create amazing things. And I just am so admiring of you. It's obviously why politics was an angle you went into for a wonderful little term.
Yeah, it's been the last 4 years, and honestly, it's been one of the biggest honors of my life to serve those that chose to put their X marks the spot next to your name.
Yeah,
it's a very humbling experience when that happens, and that's how I've approached it. You speak of understanding the emotional dynamics of what's happening, and I think that's really speaks to my life. When people ask me, well, what gets you out of bed every morning? And, for me, it's people. Who am I going to see? What connection will I be able to make? How can we actually, hear those stories? And, in large part, I would talk about the stories that I would take to Victoria. And every constituency meeting, every group that I would have the opportunity to hear from, it really became what I carried. It was those very stories and those very emotions that I would use to propel us as a province forward. And hopefully I made that small dent. I mean, I have big shoulders and a head that likes to beat against walls. So hopefully I did my part in opposition and in making a difference.
Well, I have to say, having somebody in there with the voice of a construction and development background is so meaningful, because a lot of those decisions get made sometimes with none of that mindset at the table, which can be frustrating. So, thank you for a very thankless job. And I'm excited to see you back at the helm of Troika.
Yes.
Acting CEO and founder. Mm-hmm. Now, I know of you from West Harbour, but where did this start? And of course, we got two women sitting around the table talking construction today.
The irony.
Where did this start for you?
So back in the late 90s, I had come to the Okanagan with my then husband. Mm-hmm. I was pregnant with our first child, and literally it was me walking into different offices, 7 months pregnant, saying, "Don't you want to hire me? Come on, I work really hard." And so from that perspective, it was just very difficult. It was the 90s in BC. Our economy had slid into an absolute tailspin of destruction. People were really curious and thought we were lunatics for moving from Alberta, which was currently on fire in the late 90s. And not the fires we experience now, but economic success. And we were moving to BC, which was literally in the doldrums. Yeah. And so, here we came, and when I couldn't find a job, I went and talked to my local MLA, who was at that time John Weisbeck. And I said, "What do we do? I mean, this government is driving our economy into the abyss. How are we going to fix it?" And he looked at me and he said two things. One, go and start your own job. And number two, get involved with politics. So that started my foray into becoming an active participant. And no, I never had imaginations of becoming an MLA, but I did have imaginations of always being involved, always being at the table, always being part of the solutions. Mm-hmm. So I started working on affordability back in, the early 2000s, 2001, 2002, 2003, when the city of Kelowna was working on the 4 Pillars project, and always being a participant. But, in the 90s and starting into the 2000s, I went and started my own consulting firm. So started consulting for other developers, for other builders who wanted to build product. The city of Kelowna's front desk staff became one of my biggest referral bases. It's like if a developer stopped in and said, "I don't know what to do here," they'd call her. And so I started consulting, but really didn't find a company that I connected with wholeheartedly. I felt like, there's got to be a different way to do this. There's got to be a way that you start with a community mindset, that you start with vision, that you start with values, that you really create a culture within your organization of belonging, and that belonging then permeates out into all the product that you create, and that profit comes from doing things the right way, not from really squeezing out every dollar that you can. Mm-hmm. And so I started building a business plan. I thought, hey, look, this is what everyone else did. I asked 5 of the biggest developers I could find to have a coffee with me. And as a 22-year-old young woman, I did not have an issue getting those coffee dates, largely because I was non-threatening. Yeah. So it was like, okay, David Podmore, can you have a coffee? And what would you say, to someone? And I asked three of the same questions. What would you tell a younger you? What would you do all over again? And what would you never do again? And those 3 questions I asked of every developer that would have that coffee with me, whether it was Nat Boza, whether it was David Podmore, whether it was Michael O'Dane or Al Stober. And and built my business plan based on everything that they said. And owning my own construction was one of them.
Well, there's just not enough time to keep talking about this. Renee, you're blowing my mind right now. So 22 years old, approaching all of the largest developers you can, figuring out your business plan in the early 2000s, probably the only woman on the scene.
Oh, yeah. There was none of me. No.
We are going to definitely come back and talk more about this. Welcome back to The Real Build. I'm Jamila, your host, and I have a very special guest with me, Renee Merrifield. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
We have just been diving into her history in construction. And if you can imagine, a 22-year-old girl moves from Alberta to Kelowna in the late 90s. We're entering the early 2000s, which I just want to remind everyone out there, that was 25 years ago, 24 years ago. Shock factor. And she's approaching the largest developers in the community. Probably had to reach out to Vancouver as well.
Lots in Vancouver.
Yeah. And sing like, give me your wisdom. Tell me what to do. And so she has these meetings and you develop the concept, the business plan for Troika.
Absolutely. So, from each of the developers, I took a nugget. David Podmore told me, always own your own construction, because I have to go to Boza's and buy it from them. Michael O'Dane always told me, to start in multifamily, 4-story wood frame at the time was kind of a real sweet spot. Nat Boza told me, if you can't do a pro forma on the back of a napkin, don't use your spreadsheets to do it. It's not doable. And so all of these little tidbits, Joe Siegel told me, basically trust your gut. Walk onto a site and trust your gut. And I still have an investor in one of my funds who literally walks the site every single time before he'll invest. He wants to feel the dirt, see the area around. And it's amazing. It's amazing how much your gut instinct becomes honed after years and years of doing that. So yeah, it was really good. And the last one was Al Stober, who said own rentals.
Yeah, I mean, that's the dream.
Absolutely.
Sit back and collect rent, right?
But it's not just that. It's actually that cash flow stabilizes the ups and downs from development.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned 24 years, and in that 24 years was one of the biggest recessions that we've ever seen as a globe. And it was a dark, dark time for us. And we made decisions that were probably very difficult decisions, but and definitely cost us the most, but were the right ones from an integrity perspective and from a reputation perspective, and ones that I'm really proud of. But it certainly was difficult. So owning rentals really stabilizes some of those ups and downs that anyone who's in development knows happen.
Yeah. And I mean, right now, like, development is very top of mind because the need for housing is more than it's ever been. But the risk factor in being a developer, in making that commitment, and that commitment to your investors that are pooling the money in, and the concept of the community that takes years to execute, through ups and downs and everything in between, that risk that you take on is huge.
It's massive.
And you have built some major communities in this city. Like, let's talk about them. Like, we talked about West Harbor, one of the most beautiful, I think, beautiful luxury boat in, boat out communities that you can get in the Okanagan. But also Green Square.
Yes.
Tell me about Green Square.
Oh, Green Square I'm really proud of. That one, I worked our consulting team probably too hard, maybe just hard enough, to really create an exceptional community in the middle of the Lower Mission. And so all the buildings, if you walk through there, you'll note that it's very walkable. The pathway goes right through and is at ground level. So we didn't just jack up the buildings and berm them so that it's kind of that very hostile to pedestrians. You kind of walk along, but you walk along this berm rather than seeing people or walking along to see doorways. And so we put urban townhomes or kind of those 3-bedroom units all the way around the parkade to hide the parkade, and then we put this beautiful green corridor all the way through. And what I imagined were the kids. Right, we're right next door to Casorso Elementary. anniversary, I imagined, what does a parent feel when they're walking to wait for their kids? We put a little green space right by the entrance of the gate, and made sure that we had a park bench there, right? For the parents that are waiting. And then we thought, yeah, what better way than for those kids to come out and be able to walk right to their, to where their homes are within the community or beyond the community. So we didn't fence it off. We didn't gate it off. We made sure that it was really breathable. But then all the buildings are offset from one another, so none of the patios are looking directly into other units, and then surrounded it all with this beautiful, townhouse area. So it's one of those communities that I'm really proud of. We did it to a LEED standard. We hit Step Code 3 before Step Code 3 was even a thing. So for us, it was an achievement on a lot of different fronts, and gave everyone the rooftops of these units so that they could enjoy them.
Lovely.
Yeah.
And now, when you started Green Square, like, it was kind of out of the way, right? Like, it wasn't as in the mix of the city as it is right now.
It still was. I mean, Mission Woods was already there, which has been there for a number of years, and Mission Meadows was already halfway through its build. So it definitely was. I mean, yes, it was the pumpkin patch. We had the neighborhood come out and protest because we were destroying their pumpkin patch. But ultimately, the city benefited. They got a 5-acre park out of it, which, has not been built yet, but the land is there for it. Yeah. And we also created units. And those units, I would say, some of them were truly affordable.
I agree.
They were more affordable than what is being created today and being called affordable. So, I'm really proud of that one. And when I look back, Troika always was about what does the community need and how do we meet that need. And so, when I look at some of our other projects, whether it was Yaletown, 40% of those units were achieved under an affordable threshold, which back then was very low. We're talking 125,000 to 199,000, which was exceptional at that time. Our gate project, again, a project that was created that barely topped over the 200,000s for 3-bedroom townhouse units. City Brook townhomes, we were selling those at $139,000 or $159,000.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And those are for townhomes. And, I haven't checked lately to see what they would be, selling for now.
Don't.
But yeah, probably.
Don't.
But even when we celebrated our 20th anniversary, each of the executives were asked to choose their favorite project.
Okay.
And West Harbor had already been chosen, so I couldn't choose it. Green Square had already been chosen, so I couldn't choose it. And those were both by executives that lived in those communities, so I felt like they should have them. And so I chose one of my very first, which was City Brook Townhomes, and on Finley and Fitzpatrick, there in the North End, that was created for those that work up in the North End, that had children that went to school there in Rutland, and that really needed that affordability threshold met for them. And when I went to that community and stood in front of it, I was so proud. The waterfall still worked out in front, and it was just beautiful, and exactly the way we intended it. The trees had all matured all the way along the outdoor or the outer corridor, which we had put this trail system that would connect all the way through, and the park space right in the center. So I was like, I'm sitting there going, this is beautiful, and it's more than beautiful. It's a place that people call home, and that people create community inside of.
And there's another townhome project that's up in Black Mountain, right?
Yes, the Gate.
The Gate.
Yeah, and we called it the Gate because it was on that Highway 33, and it was the gate into Kelowna and the gate out of Kelowna and into Joe Rich and Big White.
I love it.
And again, we conformed to the neighborhood and wanted to really fit in with the aesthetic. So it was an aesthetic that we hadn't done, more Tudor style, but beautiful. We over-treed it. So we put more trees than what was ever required of any landscape plan, really to make sure that they had a buffer against Highway 33. Yeah. And again, it's, those units are beautiful. And when I walk through them, we were a little ahead of our time in some of the things that we put into them and built into them back then.
Now, in the 24 years in business?
24.
24 years Troika has been operating, building massive, massive communities. I mean, tens of millions hundreds of millions of dollars going into development into the city. How many units have you created? Do you know?
I think it's just over 3,000 that we've created, but we have about 2,000 right now in our funnel.
In production.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's always the thing with development, right? It's, it takes you a long time to kind of get those first numbers.
Yeah.
Or those first units. But once you're on a roll, it's almost, it's almost like running downhill. You just try and keep your legs going as fast as you need them to. And ultimately, I always said I want to be the grandma that takes my grandbabies and says, hey, look, that's a project that I did to provide housing. And it's really interesting because one of our sons is making his big launch into the independent world. And he just said, like, oh yeah, I'm going to go and look at a unit at Yaletown to rent. And I my husband said, do you know that Renee, that's one of her developments? Like, did you know that? And, he was kind of laughing and he's like, I thought it was, but I wasn't totally sure. So, it all comes full circle, and that's going to be one of his, and he's looking for a roommate because it's a 2-bedroom unit.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's exactly what we designed those for. So pretty exciting.
Oh, so I want to just hang back on that 3,000 unit number in 24 years, because when we come back next, we're going to dive into the densification of BC, and you've sat in a political seat hearing all of this going on, and we're going to talk about this next. And that 3,000 number in 24 years represents, it takes a lot of people and a lot of money and a lot of time to produce housing.
Absolutely.
We'll talk more next. Welcome back to The Real Build. I'm your host, Jamila. I have just a special guest today, Renee Merrifield, who's, we learned, developed most of Kelowna.
I don't think most, no.
A very large chunk. And we listed off some amazing communities that she has come from her brain and has been produced here in the city. And in that time, last 24 years, has made 3,000 doors, which is a significant amount of units in this city. And what I want to talk about next with you, because you've been sitting in a political seat and you've heard all the rumblings and all the things. And one of the biggest moves that I think a government has ever done quickly, good or bad, is this massive rezoning for single-family homes across the entire province. The government stepped in last fall and said, hey guys, all my municipalities, by June, you need new bylaws that represent 4 to 6 doors on every single-family home property in your municipality. You got to rewrite these bylaws so people can come in June and file a development permit and a building permit and do this. And by the way, we're going to tell you a whole bunch more things you have to do, cutting out the red tape, make this easier. We got to produce housing, right?
Yeah. I'm going to be contrary here.
Yeah, I think we will be through this whole part.
It's okay. And I would say, it's a big change for towns or municipalities where they haven't already seen some progress made. Mm-hmm. So, if I jokingly said, yeah, it's a big change if you're Karamias, but is it a big change for Kelowna? Well, we already had infill development. We already had 4-plexes and 6-plexes being built on single family lots. Mm-hmm. The city, and forgive me on the dates, but it's 5 or 6 years ago started, pre-zoning areas of the city and fast tracking applications, which is like very progressive from that perspective. But I would say 20 years ago when, Kettle Valley was just a brainchild, when Wilden was just 3,000 acre farmland, when Lakestone's outside of our jurisdiction, but with these subdivisions, Kirshner Mountain's another one, but these subdivisions were created with all of this diverse housing within it. So we have single family, we have duplexes, we have multi, we have townhomes. These are complete communities. They have commercial, but the difference between the province government's using a one-size-fits-all hammer and the cities creating and crafting it, is that the cities, when they created and crafted it, did so with all of the necessary infrastructure. So I'm not just talking about the pipes in the ground. We could talk stormwater and sewer and water capacity, et cetera. We could talk about all that. Yeah, sure. But what we really need to talk about is the schools, the transit system, the actual roadways, and how they're actually going to hold all of that density. And some people would say, well, that will force everyone to take buses. Great if we had buses, buses that would be as reliable as what we need in order for people to actually get out of their cars or give up their cars. We don't have that. So this might have been a one-size-fits-all hammer that works for Vancouver, except Vancouver's already said, no, thank you. We've already done that. We don't need it. So they're not meeting their housing needs assessment, but they're also, telling the government that they don't need to change their bylaws. Or Surrey, maybe it works there because they do have SkyTrain, they do have bus systems, but here. This is going to be a really difficult transition to make. And what happens is that if you have these smaller, infill projects, it's going to be harder and harder to actually get the larger infill projects, the ones that will deliver 150, 160 units, because all of a sudden every landowner who owns a single family is like, no, I want to do a sixplex. And each of those sixplexes are $1.2 to $1.5 million. And so you're not going to get the purpose-built rental building of 160 units because you can't make it work at those price points or those values.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. Like a city like Kelowna, which is already progressively down the road of densification and building and turning into a city and not staying a town anymore. And I would say, I really love this area, this space of infill. And I've been kind of working in this area in Lake Country, Kelowna, West Kelowna, right down to Penticton for quite a few years now. And everyone's kind of done this a little differently. And I have to say, I have been really excited about this new zoning because what I think it does is it gives landowners, individuals, that opportunity to increase generational wealth, increase rental income on their own property, and add these units that we need to bring into the community. Do I think that relying on those homeowners to provide the lack of housing need that we have to make up for what we need? No, I mean, they're never going to turn product over as fast as a developer can come in and take up a city block and put 290 units right there. So it's funny because your perspective is the larger, the bigger, put in big communities, maximize the land. And so I'm seeing that here now. My perspective has been a lot smaller on the individual landowner getting the opportunity to redevelop and add some generational wealth to their properties. Communities like West Kelowna, large older neighborhoods like Glen Rosa that were all built on septic systems that now have sewer systems running through. So they have large lots, old 80s box houses, 70s houses, ready to be revamped, turned over. I think areas like this, hillside, where you're not necessarily going to get, condo communities in there. It could be just a nice, slow addition of housing to the need, but it's never going to hit the numbers that we're looking for.
And I think that you hit on a great point. I think that there are really appropriate areas where this type of housing should be used and should be fast-tracked and should be aggressively sought out. But if you use the same areas that could be used for more density, for higher density, those will be in direct compete with one another. And all you need is one homeowner that decides, I'm not going to play ball on a land assembly. Land assemblies are the hardest to get. And all you need is one landowner who decides, I'm not going to play ball, to then shut down not one unit, not 6 units, but hundreds of units. So I do think that this one size fits all hammer was I would say, too aggressive and doesn't take into account the nuance of community, the nuance of where this is really appropriate and where this could really make a dramatic impact, and where it should be reserved for higher densities. And I think that this government was big on, government knows best, government's going to do it the way it wants to do it, and government's going to use a one-size-fits-all. Look at the Airbnbs. Airbnb could have been dealt with in such a different manner. And, Stats Canada came out with its report that was just done 3 weeks ago that said it has made no difference. The Airbnb legislation has made zero difference to the rental inventory and rental stock. And we're talking they acknowledged it was 0.02% of a difference or change. That is minuscule.
Yeah.
But look at what it has done to our tourism industry, to our economy. I mean, I have had med students staying in my home because they can't find any Airbnbs to stay in, and the Holiday Inn was going to charge them $16,000 for the month. We're talking locums and travel nurses and medical students and people who are coming here for treatment. This medical student was telling me a story of this family who is just absolutely desperate to try and find somewhere that they can stay on a short-term basis, that they can cook food and have their children in a separate room. I mean, we have that one-size-fits-all hammer, rather than allowing a city to say, these are areas where this is appropriate, these are areas where this is not appropriate. This is what we should be doing, this is what we shouldn't be doing, and government of BC, can you please help us with enforcement? Yeah. That's what they were asking for. And instead, government came in and one size fits all. And I mean, all we have to do is look at New York. New York's rental market is a mess. It's gone up in its price rather than down since Airbnb legislation was brought into effect. And what's happened is Airbnb, or that short-term rentals, just gone underground.
Well, and I love that you brought up Airbnb because, and I also want to make sure all the listeners know, this is not the news show. This is the talk show. This is our opinions here. So feel free to call in and let us know what you think. But Airbnb was a huge mistake. The beginning of time, BC exists because of tourism. They sent human beings with dynamite into rock canyons to blow out tunnels, to run a train system, to bring tourism to BC, so BC had an economy. The reason why Albertans moved out of the thriving metropolis economy in the early 90s to come to BC, because it's beautiful and you come here to visit. Removing Airbnb, and I'm a huge fan of what you give the little people to get the edge, the financial edge. That they stripped that away from people. You could turn your bedroom into something, a carriage home. You could have a rental property that Airbnb'd and made good income, and they took that away. I am hot about that topic. We're going to touch on it a little bit more when we come back too, because maybe there's a way we can get it back. Who knows? But stay tuned. We'll keep chatting. Welcome back to The Real Build. This is Jamila, your host. I'm here with Renee Merrifield, and I know you're hanging on the edge of your seats because we were just talking about Airbnb. This had to have been the hottest topic of the last year, which is why we snuck in all this densification and nobody knows about it. But Airbnb, okay, obviously we're both hot on this topic. There's a provincial election coming. Is there a pathway back for Airbnb in this election? Absolutely.
Even during the debate of that bill, our party put forward 4 different amendments that would right size it for communities, that would allow, I think you said the little person to really see an opportunity. And I think there is absolutely a path back, but it's not going to be with this NDP government. They've been very emphatic that they are not bringing, Airbnb back. So if there is a pathway and it doesn't have to come back in exactly the same way. There were issues with how it was being dealt with before. So I don't want to just say everything was great and nothing needed to be done.
Yeah.
No, municipalities were asking for help, in enforcement. And I've worked with constituents who are beside themselves with, the bachelorette parties going on right next door to them. So it was not perfect the way it was being dealt with or done before. But that bachelorette party can still take place right now as long as the owner is home. And I'm putting that in quotation marks and air quotes there. So is there a pathway forward? Absolutely. But we're going to have a different party in power in order to see that.
So, I mean, if Airbnb is a hot topic for you and you're pro Airbnb and maybe you're losing revenue right now, or you've had to completely change your long-term investment goals because of the Airbnb changes, pay attention to this next election, provincial election, and hear what people are saying around Airbnb.
100%. And around all the laws that have been brought in, whether that is with decriminalization, whether that's with the densification that we just talked about, whether that's and densification, I don't see that one really going back. That the municipalities have had to do too much work.
Oh, yeah.
And it would be such a burden on them to see that revert. But I could see amendments made. I could see, things happening that would ease that a little bit. And some of the strata laws that were brought in that have really affected stratas in a negative way, I think could also be changed and be changed for the better.
Yeah.
What we need is a government that's really focused on stimulating supply. We have to get to, and that, I mean, this NDP government spent the first 5 years trying to quell demand and make it more difficult to own or make it more difficult to rent. And I mean, when you do that and then all of a sudden you have a population grow, you're going to see exponential price increases. And that's exactly where we sit today, the highest price market in North America and the highest price rental market in all of Canada.
And I think like one thing that I say, and I'm not, I don't have the political tongue to say this in the right way. Who knows? We'll get calls about this. But when it's almost like it's shameful for construction and building and rental to be a profitable business for people. It's like it's not supposed to be that way. However, if you need this inventory, it has to be, people have to go to work every day and do the risk to make money. And so if you're trying to eliminate all the ways to earn an income in this industry by taxing it like crazy and pushing investors out, you're not going to get supply.
Absolutely, or increasing bureaucracy, or putting more and more levies and fees onto the industry, and then regulating it to such a high extent that we can barely breathe.
Yeah.
And so what I would say is that with all of that. And you're right. This NDP government believes it's like a dirty word to like actually earn money and make a dime. The reality is that a bank will not finance you unless you are making money.
Yeah.
And our financial, situation is such that unless you're getting government money, you have to be profiting. Nobody gives you free money. And if the government wants to, they did. BC Housing and BC Builds, which has been largely a disaster. And I mean, talk about overspending. They literally would spend, in the building industry, construction companies called their spec book or their book that tells you how you have to build for BC Housing, $1 a page, because it was literally for every single page that was in there, you'd increase the price by $1 per square foot. So it's like what I would build a purpose-built rental for, and then I'd add $1 a page. Well, let me tell you, that wasn't a 17-page book; it was a 352-page book, and so basically you're paying double, and that's taxpayer dollars that are paying double.
And a lot of that money went to nonprofit organizations to build, and like it's not easy. Like a board of volunteers can't build a condo building like it anyway.
No, and that's why BC Housing was notoriously over budget. Over budget. Yeah.
That's a whole nother show. I'd love to have you back to talk about that because that gets my blood pumping. I want to ask you a few questions before we wrap up here today. And you gave me these questions. So as a younger you, I'm looking at you going, you're a mentor, you're a beast in this industry. You've built amazing communities. I have started my company only 3 years ago. I've got 3 questions for you.
Okay.
First one, what would you tell the younger you?
I would tell the younger me that just because someone says you can't do it, it only means that they can't do it, not that you shouldn't do it.
I love that. Just because they tell you you can't do it means more that they can't do it. Right. That is widespread in every business, people.
100%.
Number 2, what would you do all over again?
We always believed, and this was something that Al Stober really taught me, was the 2 pedals on the bike. and always having rentals as well as for market housing for the community. And we started in that. The first 3 projects that I launched with, one was a mixed use rental building, one was a residential rental, and one was a for market. We had amassed by 2008 several hundred units in our rental portfolio. I wish I still had those today. The reason I don't is because I went through the recession, and that was what I sold, because there was investors that wanted those. And so I would do it all over again. I would say you need those 2 pedals on the bike. You need that stabilizing cash flow, and to do it just as a standalone development company is very difficult.
So diversified. Running a development company is like having an investment portfolio, and there's lots of different angles you can take with residential, commercial, rental, for sale, all of it. So diversifying.
100%.
Yeah.
And we diversified across provinces as well, and I would highly recommend.
Third question, and I don't want to rush you because we got to wrap this up here, unfortunately. But okay. Third question, what would you never do again?
Over leverage. Anyone who tells you take 90-95% leverage, run. I would never do that again.
Great tip. Even if you're just buying a house.
100%. Have that equity there, and what's comfortable, 25 to 30% equity, and make sure that loan to value ratio really maintains in that area. You'll go to sleep every single night, whether the market's going up or going down, and you'll be able to handle it.
As we know, in the last 24 years, there are clear cycles in real estate,
100%.
And we are entering into the next one.
100%.
Renee Merrifield, thank you so much. Standing ovation.
Thank you for having me, Jamila.
I would love to have you back sometime.
Anytime.
Okay, well, there you go. That's the real build. We peeled back the curtains of Troika CEO Renee Merrifield. Thank you so much. Have a great week, you guys, and we'll see you next Tuesday.